one of the conclusions that I came to with my research on supernatural is that certain categories of beings that are referred to in traditions all around the world, shamans call them spirits. In medieval Europe, they were called fairies and elves. And in modern society, I would suggest they're called aliens. That all of these are the result of experiences in altered states of consciousness. And that if we are in the alert, problem-solving mode of consciousness, we are not going to have those experiences. But in an altered state of consciousness, there's a remarkable unanimity and uniformity and similarity amongst these three supposedly different categories of beings: spirits, fairies, and so-called aliens today. I really went into this in some depth in my research, and I found that there are really astonishing similarities amongst these three categories of beings. Very commonly, shamans, just as we saw from the painted caves, will encounter a spirit being in a therianthropic form, part animal and part human. I was astonished to discover that fairies in medieval Europe were also very frequently encountered in that form. And I have a woodcut from Holland in the 15th century on my desk, which shows a group of fairies dancing in a ring. And if you look closely at them, you see that they are therianthropes, that they have horns and hooves, that they're part animal and part human. And again, in the modern phenomenon of alien abductions, and we have massive documentation on this as a result of John Mack's work, for example. Very frequently, the abductee will first see a being who is an animal, or part animal and part human in form, later perhaps transforms into the more familiar grey type of entity. So there's that common motif running through all three of these experiences. What were fairies best known for and feared for in medieval Europe? It was abducting human beings. What are aliens today best known and feared for? Abductions. What happens with shamans? Very frequently, they experience an abduction into the spirit world. It's their first encounter. What about the issue of interbreeding with supernatural beings? I know the cases of shamans who have a sexual partner in the spirit world, a wife, even children in the spirit world. Fairies were constantly amorous towards human beings and would have sexual encounters, and babies would be created. And again, this is a standard motif of modern alien abductions. So one can go through these astonishing similarities in enormous depth, and the conclusion that I came to is that all of these are essentially the same experience, just being viewed through slightly different cultural spectacles. With human beings, interpretation is built into perception from the very beginning. So we should expect our culture to shape our perceptions, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a real basis to those perceptions. And, to cut a long story short, I would say that the beings that shamans call spirits, the beings that medieval Europeans called fairies and elves, and the beings that modern Americans call aliens are all the same beings. That everybody who has encountered these beings in whatever period of history or whatever culture it takes place has done so through the medium of an altered state of consciousness. And that altered state of consciousness may be very frequently spontaneous, and I believe that is most likely the case with the modern UFO abduction, alien abduction phenomenon, that these are individuals who spontaneously fall into an altered state of consciousness. Or it may be induced by a variety of techniques. Again, electromagnetism is interesting. We have situations where fairies were most commonly seen around megalithic sites in ancient Europe. Maybe those huge megalithic constructions, Stonehenge and Avebury and other such places, were built where they were built because there's some phenomenon in the earth, some energy of the earth, perhaps an electromagnetic energy, which affects human consciousness and opens that doorway into another realm. This may account for why in some situations supernatural experiences are shared by very large groups of people, as for example at Fatima in Portugal, I think it was 1917, if I remember the date correctly, where up to 70,000 people all saw the same supposedly supernatural phenomena. How would we explain that? It's unlikely that all 70,000 were spontaneously entering an altered state at the same time. They clearly weren't taking mushrooms or ayahuasca, not all 70,000 of them. But maybe there was some environmental effect present in that place at that time which affected the consciousness of that large group of people and briefly pulled apart the veil that separates this realm from other realms and allowed them to see through. I think it's enormously helpful in understanding all supernatural, so-called supernatural experiences. I think it's enormously helpful to look at those experiences from the perspective of consciousness. I think this is what's been missing in supernatural research up till now. It's really most unfortunate that people looking for ghosts, for example, will try to use technology in order to find those ghosts. And there are things called ghost meters and measuring of different fields. And I don't think that's really going to be very helpful in getting us far down this road. What will be helpful for exploring all forms of supernatural experience is the deliberate induction of altered state of consciousness in a systematic way. And we have the ability to do that. We can do it. All that's lacking is a social framework that would support it.